that I ain't going nowhere. I ain't blowing no smoke. I mean, I've been sober, but you should've known it. I wasn't going.
To the Women in Between podcast. I am so excited to have you. And I'm incredibly excited for another guest episode to have Marcus here, a friend, a colleague, and to talk about his journey and introduce you guys to the amazing conversations that we have. So Marcus, welcome to the podcast. Introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you for having me, Julissa. Man, I didn't realize I was in those categories. So I love hearing it. No, all kidding aside, I'm Marcus Unuigbey. I am an HR professional, HR manager. I've been in HR for 11 years. Family man, married. We have a blended family, 6 kids, which every time I say that, people are always surprised of like, and how old are you? It runs in the genes. I get it from my father for sure. But uh, um, I love being a parent. It's something that I cherish and I enjoy, and honestly gets me through life. Yeah, professional side, like I said, I've been in HR for 11 years. I have my senior certification in HR, which I was happy when I got that, and also have a sort of yeah. Thank you. That is one of the hardest exams you'll take. There's 51% fail rate, so not too many people pass that the first time. I also have a mental health certification, which is sort of a mental health first aid cert, which I'm happy to have, especially in my profession. And yeah, on a personal note, I love to exercise, love to cycle. I've been off of my hip for a little bit, but I'm going to get back on it for the summer. But yeah, it's a little bit about me.
I did not know that cycle part.
Yeah. I actually did. My biggest event was 100 miles on a bicycle.
Oh, wow.
Event here in Texas called Harder Than Hell, which if any cycler hears that, they'll know what it is. But it's in Wichita Falls, Texas. The last weekend of August, which is the hottest in Texas, and you just have to truck 100 miles.
Gosh, I did not know that. I did cycle for like 5 years, and then I realized I don't like the heat. So then I went to spin class, and I've been doing that for like 10 years.
Yeah, awesome. No, okay. I enjoy it, especially as a natural introvert. Like, it's calming to be out with nature and be on your own for however many miles you're biking for.
Yeah. Okay. No, I did not know that. We're gonna have to go to Hot Works together, and then you can get both the heat and the ride. Well, okay. So yes, you mentioned you have 6 kids. I think when I met you, you might have been on number 4, number 5. But respectfully.
Yes.
But one thing that really stood out to me, I remember when I started hearing more about your journey, even before where you are now, and where you really started having 2 kids, and it was just you as a single parent. And that's kind of what I wanted to dive into. I think there's all of these narratives that we hear on the single mom side, and that we all empathize with. But I think there's definitely stories as a single dad. And I remember entering into this life stage and thinking about a lot of the stereotypes that come with it, and putting a lot of that on myself. Like, people are going to think this of me, like my kids are coming from a broken home, like I couldn't make my marriage work or relationship work. And you start to really define yourself through those stereotypes. And I think, there's a ton of stereotypes with single dads and what that looks like, and judgments. So now I want the honest truth. So what were some stereotypes that you were putting on yourself or you were nervous about, and what were some that people were placing on you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I'm sure I won't list them all. I think number one was definitely that dads don't care. Dads don't need to be around the children as much. They are hard nosed. They tough it out. There's no emotional strain when it comes to the separation of spouse, husband and wife, partners, whoever who have children together and they split. And so there was this perceived of like from my ex of it's not going to hurt you. Like, why do you want this time with them? And that was a stereotype that hurt me the most, because I will say, like, again, I love being a parent, and so being away from them, similar to any parent, hopefully, it hurts. You want to spend that time with them. You want to watch them grow. You don't want to miss a moment, right? I
Yeah.
remember, when I missed the first whatever, and I was extremely upset. I had to get over that hump to say, I'm not going to be there. There's parents that are together and they missed
Hmm.
their first whatever. And,
Yeah.
but yeah, I would say that was probably the biggest stereotypes. And the other one was like, dads don't do the things like doctor's visits and they don't know their children's medical history. They could care less, kind of goes in the same category, but I was that dad that was taking them to their doctor's visits. Like, not no knock on my ex, their mother, uh, but didn't know the doctor's name, where they were located, uh, because I handled that, and I didn't expect her to when I'm the one doing those things and reporting back. Uh, but yeah, those are some stereotypes that I think definitely were top at the time.
Oh man. I
Yeah,
mean, I don't know. I'm on the other side of this, and I can see how somebody would think that, especially when you talk about the time. Like, I feel like a lot of the conversation for men is around, child support, and that comes up. But then time, that is a huge thing. What milestones are you missing? Learning your child's personality, right? Being able to be engaged with them. Um, but I also know, like, that there are a lot of men who might feel paralyzed in this state of, well, how do I advocate for myself to get more time with my children, and how do I do that in the healthiest way? How do I make sure that I am an engaged, co-parent in this process, and can take on, because I've had those frustrations where it's like, well, why don't you know the school's name? Why don't you know the
yeah,
teacher and the doctors and all of this? But sometimes it could be this, I'm not sure how to be engaged in this dynamic because nobody plans on it.
for sure,
So
for
you're
sure.
learning a different dynamic. So that's where I'm curious, like, how did you make sure I am going to be active, I am going to be present and involved in these kids' lives despite what this relationship turned out to be?
Man, I had to black out all the noise. There's another thing too is I was damned if I was going to be another statistic as a male, African American, black male. That underneath that category was broken homes, and that was something I was not going to stand for. And at the time, I had my ex who was fighting every tooth and nail to try to keep me away for whatever reason. And so I also had to ignore that and say, if I do the right things, I had to truly believe that if I do the right things, the rest will take care of itself, right? And so if it means that I am, at a school play and I have my ex staring me down, uh, or being rude when I get there, or whatever, those are things, again, people think a man can handle that, but that affects you. That adds stress, uh,
Mm,
not only for you as an individual, but the thought of what is this doing to my child? And so you have to fight that battle as well. It's like, man, is it easier for me not to be here because then my child is not exposed to that? Or again, believing that, no, this is going to be the future, and believing that, yes, one day we will be able to co-parent and we'll look behind and forget about this. But at the time, it's very hard to believe because you don't see it whatsoever. Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, well, you said a lot where you were saying, like, people don't think that, the school plays and performances and showing up and the attitudes that you're feeling affect a man. And it almost alludes to, like, there's almost this predetermined thought of how men should respond in those
yeah.
situations, and they're not going through the same emotional toll. It I mean, I definitely understand it on both ends, and I think, or maybe I'll ask you this: do you feel like because of that, a lot of men, you could feel like, well, let me just go ahead and sit back
I,
and I'll
I,
just ride this wave.
I have told that to so many people that even though it was hard to say it, I can see why there's some men who aren't a part of their children's life because of the way they were treated and how difficult their spouse may have made it. Because man, if I had mentioned just a small percentage of the stuff that's going on, you'd be like, oh my god, you know, don't want to use this loosely, but in some cases bullied, if not by
Mm,
my ex's mother. And so, yeah, there was moments where I was like, man, it would be so much easier to just step away, and hope that one day I'll have this opportunity, but I was intentional with I'm going to be here. It's not about them. It's not about how I feel even because I felt horrible. It's about being there for my children and being there to support them and show them that dad cares. Dad's always going to be there. There's times where my daughter would be like, everyone thinks you're a superhero because I was always at school. Like I would show up on career day. Did career day for both my children for a number of years. Volunteer was on the PTA because again, I wanted to make sure that my kids saw me supporting them and loving them, and I didn't want to be a part of that statistic, and I didn't want them to be a part of that statistic because there was a statistic about children without their father in their life. They end up potentially doing bad things, and that statistic is very high. And I was like, I didn't want that for my kids.
Yeah, yeah. You have to, and I think we've talked about this before. Sometimes you have to put the pride aside, remove the distractions, and really understand what is the end goal. And it's my child being happy.
Yeah.
What are we focusing on? And it is a lot of discomfort. And so, you have the male perspective, right? And I think an understanding of what it's like on the other end. And one of the things that I was curious is like, if you're talking to your guy friends in a similar situation, what advice are you giving them?
And I would say definitely God first. Honestly, without him, I think I would have responded negatively in a lot of situations that would have made it a lot worse. Because definitely mentally, I was thinking him. I will tell you that. So I would definitely say that. And then in terms of like tips, like I had to forgive. I had to forgive my ex every day of things she was doing. I had to forgive her mom, and then most importantly, I had to forgive myself. Like, hey, it's not your fault that this situation the way it is. And I pushed through that, and so that's the things I would recommend is like do that, and then most importantly, block out all the noise. Again, remaining with that focus of why are you there, what's the end goal, and staying faithful to that. And sometimes it's hard to remember that in the moment when things aren't going well. And that applies to anything in life, right? It can be work. It can be anything, right? So it was definitely a challenging situation. It's something that now I thank God that I was persistent and intentional because things are a lot better.
Hey, and that leads us to, maybe your favorite topic. It's still a topic I'm working on, but co-parenting.
Whoop, whoop. It does exist.
It does.
It does exist.
And so I don't know, like for me, I think when I thought about co-parenting and what that journey would be, first of all, I had unrealistic expectations. I think I was going
I think we all did.
Yeah, because I think I was going by what I saw, and you see in social media, we all go on vacation together, and we have these planning meetings together, and he lives down the street. And my tale, I thought that was it. I was like, yeah. So me and my ex, we're gonna live down the street from each other. We're gonna have this amazing relationship. We're not gonna argue anymore because we're not together. So
Yeah.
there shouldn't be any
Shouldn't
more
be any
problems.
issues.
No.
There might even be more if we're being honest.
Hey, I think so. I think so, especially if you come out of it healed, but that's a story for another day. But just really thinking like this is what it's going to be, and we're going to spend holidays together, and it's just going to be this beautiful thing. And Christmas came around the corner, and I was like, I actually don't want to do any of that.
Yeah.
And
well, the furthest thing from what I want to do.
I don't. And and hey, we talked about, you don't think that there's going to be all of this conflict, but I've told a lot of people co-parenting is one of the most challenging relationships that I've ever had.
Oh my gosh, hands down.
Because you can't just block them.
No, they are there.
They are there. And I think, like you said, you've been able to see like over time how things have shifted and changed for your relationship because you have done a lot of, personal inner work to help drive that. So I want to talk about like, what was it like in the beginning? Right? And then where did you start seeing it change?
Yeah. So in the beginning, there was no co-parenting. It was I do what I do over here, and you can do whatever the heck you want to do over here. And obviously that affects the kids because there's no consistency with
Mm-hmm.
routines or just how the household operates. And there's still going to be an element of that, but uh, there was no talks at all. So not being aware of going to the hospital, right? As a parent, you should know when your child goes to the hospital, what's
Yes.
going on, not knowing where they're at. Which again, as a parent, you should know if your child's out of state, who your child's around sometimes, that can be important. And so there was no communication with any of that. So that was the beginning, being intentional and forcing myself in and, you know, leading by example. So anytime I had took them to the doctor, updating her, even letting her know beforehand. If I was taking trips with them, letting her know beforehand and, hey, we're thinking about this, making her feel like she's a part of the planning. Sometimes she wasn't, but still, introducing that. And again, mind you,
Mm-hmm.
these are times when I'm not giving that same respect, and I'm still being treated poorly. And so there's moments where I'm like, I don't even want to freaking tell you this. But again, setting that example of like, this is the type of relationship I want to have with you, and having faith that one day you will be reciprocated. And if not, knowing that I did my part, like I had to
Yeah.
be okay with that. And so being persistent with that, like I slowly started to see her start giving me that information. And I remember the first time that happened, I was like jumping up for joy. And so I like, okay, like it was a little nugget from God to say, hey, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing the right thing. Now, did that happen every time? No. Was it intentional? Probably not. Maybe sometimes it was. Most times it probably wasn't. It was just, we're human, right? We forget. We live our own lives. And,
Yeah.
she also has to communicate with her people, and then and may forget about me, but just continue to build upon that. And then that's when it slowly started transitioning. And then I continued to do my thing, and she would continue to include me in those things. And then we we did start planning together. We started, inviting them over to hang out and play games. And mind you, this is still at a time where I haven't fully forgiven her, and so a little bit
Mm.
was unauthentic. But I was like, I know that it's important to create that dynamic. If nothing else, see for the kids to see us that we're trying to work together and try to do things to create that bond. Because like any relationship, if you don't spend time with someone, you're not going to build a relationship. You're not going to be able to understand them in the way they think. Because there's sometimes they do something, and I'm like, why would you do that? But if you spend time with them, you start to learn their brain. And you're like, okay, I see why she made the decision. I may not
Yeah.
agree with it, but I understand, and it's not malicious. It's because this is how she thinks. So yeah, that was, I would say that was the change. I tell people that relationships or a co-parenting, like it takes two and sometimes four, depending on the dynamic. And it's harder than a relationship, man. I tell you, like, because
Yeah.
there's so many individuals that are now have a hand in the making. And I put more effort into this than I would have just if I stayed with a person. It is complex if you are intentional about it and everyone's putting forth the effort, because you have to think 10 steps ahead of like, who do I need to include in this decision, how far
Mm-hmm.
along with it. And yeah, but now, I mean, we and one of the things I did that they hated at the beginning was sitting next to them during my kids' practices, because I read, there was
Yes.
a co-parenting book that I read, and it mentioned that. And the example they gave is like, after a game, the kid wants to go to their parents, but if their parents are sitting up, they're torn. They have to make a decision. Who do I go
Mm-hmm.
to? Inevitably, you're going to make someone mad, and I didn't want to put that extra strain on my child. And again, getting those looks of sitting next to them, I'm sure they're thinking, "Why the hell is he biased?" Because of the kids. Like that was my
Yeah.
main focus. But now it's a natural thing. They know that we sit together at every game, and we talk about it. We cheer the kids on, and it's a beautiful thing because when they look in the stands, they don't have to look different sections.
Both
They look,
ways. Yeah.
yeah, one spot. That's my family. They're all there supporting me, and yeah. So it's. I mean, if you would have asked me if I imagined this to have turned out, I would have said hell no. I
I
live
mean,
8 houses down from my spouse now, which
see.
people were like, "What?" But again, I didn't want my child to be in two different neighborhoods or come to my house and not have its friends around to be able to come around because they're not nearby. I wanted to make it as easy as possible for them. And some people may say that's crazy, but for me, that it was a no brainer. It was a no brainer. And so now we're 3 houses down from the bus stop, and so they come over all the time. There's no court order. Whenever they want to come by, they come by.
Yeah.
And so that's what I wanted. I didn't want it to be a rigid thing. This is family. And that's
Yeah.
one thing I also said. I'm talking a lot, sorry, but like
You're
I told
good.
her, I had the mindset of like, and it's crazy because when we separated, it was like, okay, we're not family anymore. But that's furthest from the truth. Like you still operate, or have to, in my opinion, operate as a family. They had kids afterwards. We had kids afterwards. There's times where our kids that we had together may want to spend time with their younger brother and sister, so I can't block them out, right? And so I had to include them in things. And so now we pick their kids up. Now they watch our other kids. We're going on a trip
Mhm.
this month to Colorado. They're going to be watching our kids, and so we are
Wow.
an extended family. And I said that early on. I was like, whether you like it or not, because this was the point where we're conditioned. So like,
Mhm.
we are a family. We're going to have to do things that families do, and we have to get in that mindset. And I remember hitting them, they're responding and not believing that, but now we're operating like that. And
Yeah.
so, anyways, I'll shut up and let you
No, all of that was amazing. And so much of that I didn't know. So how long have you guys been co-parenting?
go. Let's see, since 2016.
Okay.
Yeah. So, well, that's how long we've been, I guess, separated. If
Yeah.
you're officially talking about how long we've been working well together, I don't know. I don't say I would say really well within the last 2 years. I
Okay.
would say 4 years or so ago is when it started to transition a little bit.
Okay. Okay. So it does take some time to get to those points.
Uh,
What a journey.
oh yes.
And a lot of perseverance. And you said something in there where you were talking about, like, you were still extending the courteousness of keeping her involved with your children's life, extending that olive branch even though you were still in the process of forgiving.
Mm.
And I think that's a part that people don't put a lot of weight on, with how difficult that is.
Oh my gosh. It's challenging.
Now,
It is very challenging.
it's very challenging. I've said I am an Academy Award winning actress. Give me my prize, because, and I mean, I think now it comes authentically, but
Yeah.
in a way you have to put on this face. And in the beginning, for
Yeah.
me, my therapist had encouraged me to learn the Greystone method. Because, and I'll back up, because I wasn't in a healthy relationship by any means. And
Hmm.
so first it was the Greystone method of, it's only going to be direct. As my brother would say, it sounded like I was like a help desk agent. Yes,
Yeah.
no, is there anything else? Thank you.
Jeez. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people don't know this. Like, we were on a court ordered app for a good minute
Yeah.
because he couldn't respectfully talk to me. So, you
Wow.
know,
Wow.
yeah, yeah,
Man,
yeah,
that's wild.
yeah. It's kind of crazy. And it was probably crazier for him because he thought I was going to tolerate it. That part we might actually edit out. But so it starts from there. But when we talk about going to kids games, right, there's extended family, there's other people around, and you have to put this face on of, I'm going to respect this person, I'm going to be kind to this person, and no one in the background knows, like, how this person could be treating you,
Yeah.
that you're trying to get over. Like, I've gone to basketball games before where the night before he and I are in an argument about something completely different, and you have to show up and
Oh
you
yeah.
have to put a smile on your face and put that behind you and be there for your kids. And for a really long time, I needed my family and for that support.
Yeah. Yeah.
To where if we're going to a game, I need you guys flanked by
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
because
Oh no, absolutely.
yeah,
My wife played a big part in that, and
yeah,
because you're in your head and you're like, especially as a guy, like I feel like I am, I don't want to curse, but feeling like a little girl, um, with how I'm handling these things. And so I'm like, there's that ego of like, you're going to let this person play you like that or treat you
yeah.
like that. And there's that ego that comes in, and you want to say, no, I'm not going to do that. But again, thinking God first of like, always be kind no matter what, which is again the hardest thing that anyone can do because you have to put your feelings aside, your emotions aside, and say, I just got to do right. I know that the rest will take care of itself. And so yeah, that saying, "Fake it till you make it." In a lot of ways, that's what it
It's
was in a
true.
lot of ways. Yeah, yeah,
It really is true, because that's what I was doing, and I think probably here in the last 2 years, now it's more of like, well, like you said, forgiving yourself, forgiving them, and not needing that to be like a mutual thing. I can
yeah.
do that within
Yes.
myself and give
Oh man.
myself that closure. So now we're past that, and then I also think it's a matter of being content in the life that you have
Mm,
right
mm.
now, to where you can understand this is serving the greater good. So I know I found myself in situations where I'll pause and I'll think, Jaleesa, if you were in this situation 3 years ago, you would have crumbled. And I think it ends up benefiting the kids too, where they can see you operating healthy because your kids are watching how you handle dynamic relationships as well. I know you've kind of touched on the fact that you now have a blended family. You know, your ex-partner has a blended family. So I'm really curious, I'm not necessarily in that stage yet, but what were like the initial steps? Like what did that look like in the beginning, as you have significant others coming in, and now we're starting to have kids, and that's starting to change the dynamic. So what was that stage like for you?
It was a challenging one. I think I, I hate to call it being naive, but yeah, there was a thought of me thinking, I have kids of my own.
Mm,
I understand how that works. Like we'll mesh well. I'll be this, this my additional daughter, my bonus daughter. I'll be the parent to be easily transition. And what I didn't account for was different uh, foundation set for each family. Right, we're taking two different families and putting them together. So different values, different ways we grew up, and different ways we think about disciplining the kids. I didn't take into account any of that, and so I'm thinking that I will. What works for me works for everyone, and that I'll just take what I've been doing and just continue doing that. And that was resistant from my ex-wife, of course, which makes sense because hey, that's not how I do things, right?
mm-hmm.
And so we didn't really talk about that like he should have at the beginning. So that was a challenge of learning how to making sure that we communicated of like how we want to do X. And there's a part, and I think a lot of people that think some of these things should just come naturally,
Yeah.
but it doesn't happen that way. You have to communicate every little single thing that that I didn't think about at least. And so, hey, like, how should we discipline? What moment should we discipline? You know, should I discipline? Her biological child, or should I not? And so, those are different conversations that we had to have to make sure we got to a good place. And yeah, and I'm sure yeah, I feel like you asked some other questions that I'm leaving.
I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm really trying to fathom it, because you're right. There's a lot of details that you don't think about, down to like, what does your routine look like when you wake up
Mm-hmm.
in the morning with your kids?
Yeah,
Right? How
yeah,
do you speak to your kids? How do you encourage your kids? And then you have, right, the in-law part of it. What does their involvement look like? Because I would imagine, right, if you've been a single parent, because I know how involved my parents are in my life, right?
yeah,
So you have those dynamics where you can have heavily involved in-laws, and then you're trying to blend your family and figure that out, but they're
yeah.
used to
Yes.
playing that
Mm.
second role. Did that happen with you?
Not necessarily, but as you were talking, I mean, another thing that popped up was just general family traditions of like even like Christmas, how Christmas is
Mm,
celebrated, and things like that. That was a dynamic. But in terms of like, my parents, like how they interacted with the children, I don't know. I feel like I set the stage of like, this is my show, at least for my parents. We lived far away from her parents, if that wasn't an issue.
yeah.
So I didn't feel like that really created any environment or atmosphere.
Good, because you probably didn't need that added onto it.
I can see how that would though. I mean, other than, my exes very intertwined, but I wouldn't say that necessarily affected my blended family, other than there were some times where we felt tension and that would affect my mood or that would affect my wife's mood, which obviously that trickles down to our kids and our interactions with them.
Yeah.
But other than that, no.
So, that's what I was going to ask. Like, how did the kids adapt?
It was obviously, one thing I think back and like, man, maybe I should have conversated more with them about that.
Mm,
Uh, but it's a challenge, right? I mean, I still remember to this day very vividly my daughter wanting to spend time with me. And my ex was like, no, they have to get used to the schedule, and I was like, let me just take you out for ice cream, and she's no, and I remember my daughter vividly just crying. She's like, I want to go eat ice cream with my dad, and just bawling hysterically, and that just made me feel like ugh, like so terrible. But so I say that I give that story because it was a hard transition, right?
yeah.
Like they're used to seeing dad every day, and they're not, and so that was a very hard transition. And then two, when you have different roles in different houses, like,
Mm,
you know, our house, you take off your shoes. And so they're, when they first come over here, it takes a while for them to reprogram and
yeah.
say, oh, wait, I'm at dad's house. We do this. And I have to clean up for myself. I have to do it. And I had to learn to give them grace, you
Yeah.
know, of like thinking of like, okay, hey, over there, they don't do that. And like, I can't jump on them. I can't be upset that, hey, I told you several times, like, just, one of the books that I read talked about that. Like, there's a 2 day window that you have to give your kids to kind of adjust back to your normal style.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
That tracks. It's so funny because a little thing that my kids will do when they come back and it's a transition weekend is they're always calling me the other parent. Like daddy, dad, because that's where they've been, and
yeah,
and
yeah,
it
yeah,
and it takes a few hours for that to weed
yeah,
out. And I had read somewhere, because the transitions aren't as bad anymore because the kids know
yeah.
the schedule, and my kids, they love a schedule. Try to deviate if you want to. Like my daughter, she's like, no, on Thursdays we're
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
Spring break,
yeah.
they have it memorized.
Don't,
Um,
yeah, don't let it change up because they're gonna
don't
know. So,
no,
yeah,
exactly. But for in the beginning, especially when it was like, okay, we've split up, now you're in a different house, all of this stuff. And my kids were in play therapy, and we got a great recommendation on when they come home. The first thing you need to do is Epsom baths, like a Epsom salt bath, to let them
yeah.
just de-stress, right?
Man,
And
that's a
then
good idea.
I'm like, I need one.
I was gonna say that sounds good right now.
Yeah, I know it sounds good right now. And it's also like they know, like, the day that they come home, the day that they come home is like, okay, we're not going to do any chores. We're going to do our
Mhm.
baths. We're going to have dinner, and we're going to do movie night. Like, just to
Yeah,
get back to that closeness, and for them to recognize, like, okay, you're home now.
yeah,
Because it is a lot of transition. And for me, I
yeah.
was raised in a two-parent home, so I don't know what that's like.
Same. I've said that a lot. Like, I don't know what they're going through, and
Mm-mm.
it's one of the reasons I want to make it easier. On the chore note, that's something we implemented because I didn't want them coming back and having to clean a house that they hadn't been in.
Yeah.
There was just something that didn't resonate with me, but it took me a while to even let that click. And I think it was when they had went over there, and my son was like, "Oh, we had to clean up," and I thought it from a different perspective. I'm like, "Oh, that's kind of messed up." And then I thought about me. I'm like, "I've been doing the same thing." I'm like, "I'm not going to do that. Like, no, I'm not going to have you clean up what you haven't been in." And so I like that mindset of like, let's transition.
So, like, with blended family, like you said, different routines, different rules. You don't want them to be in this constant state of confusion.
Yes,
You
yes,
know what I mean? And I always think about that with my kids. And I will say, me and their dad, for the most part, have like the same parenting philosophy as far as
yeah,
how
that's
we
good.
like to handle situations. So that's always nice, because I know, like, you'll handle this the way I probably would.
Yeah.
And but I think at the same time, like, we have different rules. Like, my kids have chores here, like, and they have a chore chart, and
Yep, yep,
we have a system with that. We have a very specific routine, and I
yeah,
think
yeah.
overall our lifestyle just looks different, you
Yeah, no,
know.
same, and yeah, same thing. We have a chore chart. We do chore payments. They get paid for
Mhm.
each thing that they do. Um, and yeah, and I remember when we don't do that over here or there. When that came up a couple times, I'm like, that's okay. Like, this is the things that we as a standard in our home, and this is how we're gonna do things. And so
Yeah,
just trying to be polite with that, not be rude about. I don't give it. I don't care. Like, you gotta do it here.
exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
but there is a different dynamic. But there is also beauty when you do get to that point where you can collaborate. So, I remember one of the time where my son got in trouble with phone, and we had to like do a timeout thing, and having to communicate like obviously he's not going to be here the whole time, and so
Hmm.
had to communicate, hey, this is the situation, are you cool with that? And getting that support to say yes,
That
and so
is
I
where
was
it gets
yeah
tricky.
yeah
Yeah. The punishment. And we've had those same encounters too, where it's like, this punishment is going to lead into your weekend.
yeah
And they're not going to be able to like watch TV. This stuff, is this
yeah
appropriate? Yeah, that is a very
yeah
good one that I never thought about. Because you
yes
can't be like, because then the kids will say, "Oh, well, I'm gonna be grounded over here," and Harper pointed
yeah
that out, and I was like, "You can't, I have to teach her. You can't give them the playbook, sweetie. If you
yeah
know it in here, you don't always have to say it."
she's giving away all the goods.
She's like, "I already know how to work this game, baby." Because she's like, if I'm grounded here, that means I'm not grounded over there. And another thing that my kids are really surprised about. I remember Harper did have this incident at school, and um, she was at her dad's that night. Well, the school
Hmm.
calls me, and I call her dad, right, and let him know what was going on, and it's like, so this is the punishment that we're going to agree to. And
Yeah.
she gets to his place, and later after the punishment is they've talked about it. She calls me and she's like, "How did Dad know?" And it's just one of those things. I was like, we do talk, like
Yeah,
we
yeah,
like, it might only be via text, and it's respectful. Like, we found a
yeah,
respectful way.
yeah,
But I was like, I talked to this man,
yeah. There's
and
power in that. There's power in that.
yeah,
I love it.
yeah. So,
How did
uh,
that know?
how did he know? And now now they figured it out.
Yeah, yeah,
That one
yeah.
of us are gonna know. We're gonna at least
Communicator.
collaborate on that and
Yeah,
communicate on that.
yeah.
So the last thing I wanted to talk about, Rich mentioned that got in a certification in mental health. One of the things that I really like about you is how introspective you are. You take the time to really respond and not react. And you are just, I mean, you're my go-to person. You're everybody's go-to person, probably. Nobody ever leaves you alone. But I'm really curious, like, were you kind of checking in with where you were mentally as you were going through each of these stages, and how did that change for you over time?
Man, that is you hitting me with some good questions. So, I am because of my parents, both my mom and my dad, someone who has learned to self-reflect often. Uh, of like, what session did I just go through and reflect? How did that go? What could I have done better? Where do I need to make changes? Like, if this caused stress to me, why did it cause stress? What do I need to do differently? And so there's modes that I go into that. And so as I was going through those situations, I was constantly doing that. And that meant time by myself to think clearly and process and not allow distractions to change or change. Like, one thing that I made sure of, occasionally I would reach out and get people's advice, but I was careful with who that was
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't want to be have the wrong picture, but then I didn't want to also hear that noise. And so there's a lot of times where I didn't go to my parents because I know they would be a cheerleader for me versus giving me clear cut guidance, and which is what I needed at the time. And so it was just, yeah, self reflection of what it is I'm feeling, and then making adjustments to make sure I'm not overstressed or overloaded. Uh, and I'm human. I would be lying to say that there wasn't moments where I was stressed, and things that I did in those times. You know, exercise, cycle, be around friends to sometimes because I needed a distraction. Read. I did a lot of reading because one thing for me is when I have the fear of the unknown is to get as much information as I can to make me feel comfortable. And so I didn't know what co-parenting was, what that looked like, because I didn't grow in that. So I read books and I learned, and that helped me. If I didn't, I wouldn't have done half the things I did to try to help improve the situation. And thank God I did, because it
Yeah.
did improve the situation. But yeah.
Yeah, I feel like when I talk to a lot of people that have gone through, like, whether it's, a separation, relationship ending, and then there's kids involved, sometimes it can kind of feel like as you're going through this, you have to put those kind of on the back burner and you forget to almost check in on yourself. Because I know I was kind
Mm-hmm.
of like that, where I was like, I got to figure this out, I got to figure that out, and I have to
Yeah.
organize this, and I have to create this life for my kids. Meanwhile, Jaleesa, you're in the trenches, girl. It like just and not doing well emotionally. And I've been in therapy, I don't know, like 5-6 years now. And what my therapist really helped me understand is she's like, your mental always has to be at its peak,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's going to determine your attitude, how you're tackling certain situations, and your kids are watching you. I think
Oh
that's
man.
that's one thing that just stood out to me, is like, my kids are watching how I handle the situation.
Yeah.
And they don't know the backstory. They don't need to know the backstory. And they don't necessarily need to, like, I'm not emotionally dumping on them, but I have to handle this like there are people watching.
Yeah.
And what do I
Yeah.
want them to take from it? And I think,
So true.
I went through some of those more depressive episodes, right, where you're isolating, and they see that, and you bring up like exercise. I'm sure that's something that really helped you get through it, because it's definitely something that saved me
Yeah.
tremendously.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a balance. It's because like you said, isolating. I think there's an element of that is okay, but if you
Yeah.
go into complete isolation and don't pull in people, then that's when it's a struggle, and that's when you let your self doubts get to you, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, knowing when to socialize, when to talk to certain people, when to exercise, when to pray.
Whew, yeah. Jesus is
um,
beside me, behind me, and above, like everywhere,
yeah,
at all times. Yes.
yeah.
I agree
But
with
yeah,
you.
yeah, it's been a journey, been an interesting journey. But yeah, stress management in that aspect is definitely vital. In life is definitely vital, and it's important to be disciplined with those things that help you de-stress. I even recently learned a breathing technique that's supposed to help you de-stress in the moment in a stressful environment. And you like take a deep breath to your lungs are almost out, and then quickly inhale in, and then slowly breathe it out. And so that's supposed
Oh.
to really just release, uh, you know, relax the nerve in that moment. And what was interesting is they say if you watch a dog, they do this right before they go to sleep because that's what relaxes them.
That is very true. I'm actually going to use that because I can think of several moments where I've needed it.
Same,
I'm
especially
definitely going to
recently.
use that. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
No,
Um,
same thing.
are we talking about the same thing? um, but and it's really encouraging to hear you say that, especially because you mentioned, right, a lot of people, when we talk about stereotypes, a lot of people assume that men, and I'll even go as far as saying Black men, are just handling this like it's just rolling off their shoulders.
Yes.
And that's not true. They're
No,
taking those emotions the same way anyone else has. And I think, it is very rare that you see someone being vulnerable about that, open about that, and taking the opportunity to see where they can improve themselves. Um, because I know Black men really struggle in the area of vulnerability.
yes, for sure. That's something that I had to work on for sure. Sharing my emotion, sharing how I feel. Obviously, with with my spouse, but to myself, to because if you don't know how you're feeling, you can affect that. You can't make the right decisions. That's going to help that. And again, I think for a lot of people, it's easier not to deal with it, which is why, like I said, I can see why some fathers aren't a part of it because it's hard to navigate.
Yeah.
And so yeah, wholeheartedly.
No, I completely agree with you. Yeah, I think it's difficult to navigate. Our last episode we talked about navigating through transitions with grace. And it's really resonating and hearing about how you've transitioned and managed each stage and the people within those stage and how you've maintained those relationships. So we're wrapping up, but I wanted to ask you any final words or final pieces of advice from this conversation that you want to offer the audience. I'm putting you on the
Oh,
spot now.
you're putting me on the spot. Yeah, that wasn't in the cue card.
Authentic. It wasn't in the cue card. It wasn't in the script.
Oh, man, I mean, honestly, it'll be me regurgitating what I've already said. Life is very complex, and there's going to be things that, uh, as much as I've read to try to get a better understanding, every dynamic is different, every situation is different.
It's so
Yeah.
it's so different.
And so, yeah, you have to make the decision that's right for you, and no one else can tell you that. And so, you have to find the answer from within and believe and trust your process. And again, know that if you do the right thing, uh, the rest will take care of itself. Let go and let God. You can only control what you can control. And so yeah, you can only control what you can control. That's the ending phrase.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining this episode. It was so great having you on here, Marcus. And I will see you guys next Tuesday.
Awesome.
Cause